Hi, my name is Gjerris. I'm an associate professor in bioethics at the University of Copenhagen, and I'm here to talk about one of my research areas, which is ethics and climate change. And I'll be speaking to you under the headline of Willed Blindness, or why don't we do what we know is right in relation to climate change. And I have 3 points I would like to make. First one, just sort of illustrating to you how meat and climate change is actually connected, if you didn't know already. The other one is trying to show you why we become willfully blind towards these issues. And the third one is trying to suggest how we could perhaps begin to address these problems, not through technology, but through changing our visions of the good life. But first, meat and climate change. Animal production contributes significantly to climate change. We know that today. Somewhere around 18 to 30% of all human greenhouse gas emissions can be connected to animal production, milk, egg, and meat. At the same time, around 70% of all agricultural land in the world is used to animal production. That's a lot. A third of it is used to grow feed for animals, soybeans, maize, and so on. A third of it is used for grazing. And the last third of the agricultural land is used for growing food for humans. So we use up a lot of our resources on producing meat. Finally, the intensification of animal production has led to some new animal welfare problems that we didn't know before, for instance, Second World War. The way we have put the animals together closer and closer in more and more confined environments have given them welfare problems. Typically, we can sum them up as saying they are unable to perform their species-specific behavior. They can't do what they want to do. But there are other problems as well. I just brought one picture here. This is chicken feed. They live in the same barn for the 35 days that their life lasts, and they stand on the same bedding all the time. These animals often get what we call footpad dermatitis or foot burns. Basically, they stand in their own feces, and that burns their feet, etches holes into them that are painful. In Denmark, we produce about 100 million chickens a year, and 10% of them end up in the slaughterhouse with feet like these. And we're eating more and more meat in our part of the world. If we go back to the year 2000, globally each citizen ate around 37 kilos of meat per year. The number is much higher in the rich part of the world than in the lower, so this is just an average. But what is most worrying is that it's predicted that this will grow to 52 kilos per capita in 2030. And if we go back to all the problems I tried to show you that are related to meat production, you can see that we stand in front of a huge challenge if we are to solve these problems and at the same time make meat production grow in this way. What has been happening so far is almost nothing. And why is that? Because we know what is going on. There is a lack of knowledge about details. Most of you probably weren't aware of the foot burns in chickens. And there's also a scientific uncertainty. How much does different production systems contribute to climate change? Is there a difference between different animal types, so on and so forth? But even when we can see that our actions are an expression of shameless gluttony, and we know that if we do this, we will harm other people, for instance, by eating the amounts of meat we do in our part of the world, we continue by and large as if nothing is happening. Which is weird, because usually we see ourselves as decent people who act morally. So why is it so? And my contention should be that's because we have chosen to become willfully blind. We do not want to see the effects that our actions have on the world. And why is that? Why can we use this expression stolen from the South African author J.M. Coetzee? I think it's because we live in techno-fascism. That's one reason. We hope that something will work. We will come up with a technical solution, store CO2 underground, send it to the moon, I don't know. Make it into little boxes that we can throw at each other for fun. Just some idea, right? Perhaps we can genetically modify cows so they don't emit as much methane as they do today. Techno-fascism is the idea that, well, humankind always found out of something. So we'll probably find out of something here as well. So let's just continue and somebody will figure out something. But we don't need to change the way we live. Another reason is the fear and the complexity that all these issues raises. When faced with the consequences of climate change, if you want to read about them, you can just read the latest report from the International Climate Panel from the UN. You become afraid, because reading about a world with higher temperatures, worse weather, raising sea levels and so on isn't very comforting reading. And at the same time, it becomes very complex, because what should we then do? What should we eat? How should we transport ourselves? How should we live? How can I actually make a contribution that will be felt in the system? And faced with all that, too much information, we just give up and continue doing what we did yesterday. There's also the idea that we don't want the responsibility. It's not nice to be responsible to a too high degree. It's nice to have responsibility sort of in a little package. And you can say, oh, I'll take the responsibility for that. And you'll do it, and you can pat yourself on the shoulder afterwards and go home and take the rest of the day off. But this problem, climate change, isn't something we can solve in a few days or from 8 to 4 each day. It's something that we will have to work on for many, many years, and something that will basically influence every part of our lives all the time. And that kind of responsibility can feel too hard, so we just sort of shun it away by closing our eyes for it. And finally, I think, and that's perhaps the most compelling reason for not seeing what we actually know, is that we're afraid to lose out on the good life. We want good lives. Basically, that's what we live for, I guess. If I told you that you could just follow me and I would make sure you would have miserable lives, I think I would be leaving this room alone, right? Because you want good lives. And the changes in lifestyle that climate change tells us we should do, eat less meat, travel less, and so on, use less, right? Less materialism, no new iPhones. It just seems like a sacrifice, right? I have to sacrifice my good life for the sake of children in Africa and the polar bear and the future. And what do I care, right? We can perhaps do it for a couple of days, but then we sort of go back to sort of, but I want the good life as well. And especially when I can see that you're doing it, right? Why should I then sacrifice myself and my good life when I can see that you're just going ahead as if you didn't care? So changes are often described as not realistic. If you say we should reduce our meat intake somehow, the answer is, but that is not realistic, right? Meat is part of our stories of the good life. We want meat. And we tell stories with meat. We eat it as religious symbols. We use it in cultural tradition. We use it in social context. We connect it to our gender. So men eat red meat and women eat chicken breast and so on. We construct our identities around meat to a certain degree. Just imagine when we are coming up to this festive season of Christmas, a typical Danish Christmas dinner where they serve tofu, right? Instead of pork. How would that be, right? I think some of you would be relieved, but I think most of you would feel this is wrong, this is not Christmas, right? Because Christmas is this. Christmas is meat, as much as I can eat and then some. So how to open our eyes, right? How can we do that? One would be to make you understand or make us understand our moral obligations. Show you this is too bad. You have to take care of people, right? You can't just do what you want. You have to do what you should. And that's very good from a sort of moral, philosophical perspective, but it doesn't really change people's attitude, right? Just because people tell you you're doing something wrong, if you can see that all your neighbors are doing the same, you just continue. It's only if it sort of becomes a social burden for you to do something wrong that you will begin changing. So I think that if we want people to change, I think we need to create win-win situations. We have to accept that humans are basically small bastards, right? We are selfish egoists. So to change people's behavior, we have to show them that they win by changing their behavior, right? And that will take new visions of the good life. And here I just have some sort of headlines for that kind of life, where we see changes in lifestyle, in this case less meat, as an opportunity to live a more interesting life perhaps than just a sacrifice. That we see that what is good for others is something that is good for ourselves as well. So basically seeing our lives together not as a competition, but as a cooperation, right? In sports it's always so that if you win, I lose. This is an idea trying to say if you win, I have to win too, right? And I can only win if you win. So in that sense, we become more dependent on each other. We don't try to win against the other person. We try to help the other person to win. We bring our ideals and our reality closer together. I think most of us live in the idea that I'm a good person and I don't harm other people if I can avoid it. Here we actually have a chance of beginning to live like that in a very simple way, where we can actually start next time we sit down at the dinner table, and that could perhaps enhance our self-respect. And then finally, we have the opportunity of establishing what we could call a community of beings in flesh, a community with other living beings than humans, where we recognize them as something, not just something else, but as another being that deserves our respect, and that could perhaps enrich our lives as well. I'm very well aware this can be seen as idealistic dreaming. Climate change raises very serious challenges, and we should look at them scientifically, technically, and politically, and probably find these technological fixes, right? And why do I then stand and talk about visions of the good life, ethics, and so on? But I think that to the extent that we cannot count on technology to save the day, we actually have to face up to the fact that the greatest challenge we are facing is actually philosophical. That we have to change the way we look at the good life, and that's a philosophical challenge. And it demands philosophical thinking, not from philosophers necessarily, but from all of us. And just a final thought to make it a bit easier perhaps, because this might seem like sort of a very hard demand to put on people, change their lives, eat less meat, impact the climate less, and so on. But what if the Dalai Lama is right, and that it actually goes together? His claim is that if we want others to be happy, we should practice compassion, which actually makes sense. But his other claim is that if we want to be happy, we should practice compassion. So things actually work together. That if I help you, you help me. And if that can be translated into the area of climate change and saying that if you live responsibly, you also get a good life, it would be perhaps more interesting to try to do that than what we're doing today, which is becoming willfully blind to the problems that we know are there. Thank you.